The call of a distant bird pierced the air, and primal ears twitched. He had lived in these woods for as long as he could remember, his only companions, the creatures that shared his home. Yet, as the years passed, he grew restless. A yearning grew within him, a curiosity about the creatures that built fires and lived in metal and brick structures. He had seen them from afar, their lives a mystery he longed to unravel. In the realm of human experiences, few aspects evoke as much intrigue and complexity as BDSM. This often misunderstood practice encompasses a spectrum of dynamics where power exchange is explored within safe, consensual frameworks. In exploring these themes, one can draw parallels with the wild, unbridled spirit found deep within nature, the very essence that shapes our understanding of freedom, connection, and primal instincts. Sanctuary, untouched by the chaos of modern life, offer more than just solitude. They bring forth the raw essence of existence. It is here, amidst towering trees and the soft whisper of the wind, that one can truly connect with themselves, stripped of societal expectations and norms. Within this vast expanse, the woods serve as a backdrop for personal exploration, mirroring the intricacies of BDSM and power dynamics through the lens of nature's primal beauty. Nature hums a melodious tune that resonates with every living being. From the fluttering of wings to the rustle of leaves, each sound creates a rhythm that echoes life's dance. In many ways, those who engage in BDSM harness this natural rhythm, choreographing their own dances of power and submission. The dynamic between nature and human interaction becomes palpable when we consider the concept of energy exchange, the very essence of BDSM. Just as two partners communicate in a scene, guiding each other through sensations and limits, nature too has its own language of give and take, creating a balance that can be both exhilarating and grounding. The silence of solitude in silence, one finds clarity. Amidst the embrace of the forest, the cacophony of thoughts fades, revealing an inner dialogue that speaks directly to the heart. This solitude allows individuals to reflect on their desires, boundaries, and the delicate nuances of consent, essential components of any BDSM relationship. In the wild, there exists an undeniable power dynamic, predator and prey, sun and shadow. Understanding these interactions highlights the importance of respect and communication, hallmarks of healthy power exchange. When individuals step into the BDSM realm, they do so recognizing the gravity of wielding power over another and the responsibility it entails. His name was Primal, a moniker not bestowed by loving parents, but one that emerged from the deep, from the resonating growl that rumbled in his chest, a sound as primal as the forest. Stories of transformation often echo throughout history, capturing the essence of those who have shed their former selves to embrace something more genuine. Primal's journey speaks to the heart of every individual yearning to discover their true identity, a quest that inherently ties back to the principles of BDSM. Identity and transformation names carry weight. They signify identity and the roles we inhabit. For Primal, his name became a symbol of rebirth, a shedding of his past identity as he fused with the wilderness. This transformation parallels the journey of individuals within the BDSM community who may find liberation by embracing alternative roles and identities. The act of defining oneself through BDSM practices allows individuals to explore facets of their personality that may remain dormant in everyday life. Primal's metamorphosis reflects the beauty of self-discovery, wherein we learn not only about ourselves but also how we interact with others, navigating the complexities of power and surrender. Embracing instincts in the depths of the forest, instinct reigns supreme. Animals thrive by following their innate drives, an understanding that serves them well within the ecosystem. For those delving into the world of BDSM, tapping into one's primal instincts can enhance the experience, fostering connections that transcend verbal communication. When one surrenders to their instincts, whether in scenes or moments of vulnerability, they create space for authenticity. This return to a more natural state fosters trust between partners, allowing them to delve deeper into the realms of pleasure, pain, and everything in between. Primal's fur, once a rich, warm brown, had aged to a mottled gray, mirroring the bark of the ancient trees that had witnessed his transformation from a frightened boy to a formidable guardian of the wild. Time flows differently within the confines of nature. It shapes the landscape and all who dwell within it. As Primal transitioned from childhood to adulthood, he found solace among the ancients, the trees that had stood for generations, silently observing change. The wisdom of ages, with age comes wisdom, a truth that transcends human experience. As Primal matured, he absorbed the lessons woven into the fabric of the forest. Those who participate in BDSM often share similar journeys, learning from their experiences and growing wiser with each encounter. The trials faced in exploring one's limits, desires, and vulnerabilities become teaching moments, cultivating greater empathy and understanding. Just as Primal learned from the ancient trees, individuals engaged in BDSM must navigate the complexities of relationships, forging bonds that withstand the test of time. Guardianship and responsibility. Being a guardian means protecting what you love. Primal embraced the role of protector in his natural domain, embodying the responsibilities tied to power. In the context of BDSM, this guardianship manifests in the commitment to uphold safety, consent, and trust. Guardianship extends beyond mere physical protection. It encompasses emotional and psychological support, ensuring that both partners feel secure in their exploration. A responsible practitioner understands the weight of power dynamics, creating an environment where vulnerability can flourish without fear. At the age of 9, he had sought refuge in these woods, fleeing the cacophony of the human world. Now, at 41, the forest had become his sanctuary, its towering trees and whispering winds more familiar to him than any distant memory of human life. Escaping into the wild speaks to a longing shared by many, an innate desire to retreat from the overwhelming stimuli of modern civilization. For Primal, the woods became a haven, offering reprieve from the noise of existence. The allure of escape, the call of nature, draws individuals seeking solace. In today's fast-paced society, the need to disconnect and recharge resonates deeply. The woods symbolize a return to simplicity, echoing the core tenets of BDSM, finding clarity amid chaos and establishing meaningful connections through shared experiences. The allure of escape isn't merely physical, it's also psychological. Immersing oneself in nature can evoke feelings of empowerment and freedom, allowing individuals to shed societal expectations. Embracing such freedom is a fundamental aspect of exploring BDSM, wherein participants often seek to transcend limitations imposed by the outside world. Rediscovering the self in the sanctuary of nature, one can rediscover their essence. For Primal, the forest became a mirror reflecting his identity, shaping him into a guardian whose purpose transcended mere survival. Similarly, individuals within the BDSM community embark on a journey of self-exploration. Through engaging in power exchange, practitioners peel away layers of inhibition, ultimately revealing their authentic selves. Each interaction becomes a stepping stone towards self-acceptance, an opportunity to identify desires, fears, and boundaries, fostering a profound understanding of one's place in the world. His eyes, sharp and knowing, scanned his surroundings with the vigilance of a creature eternally attuned to the pulse of the natural world. Every rustle, every flicker of movement was noted and understood. To the untrained eye, Primal might appear as a ghostly apparition, a myth among the trees, but to those who truly saw him, he was the embodiment of the wilderness itself. Awareness is key in both nature and interpersonal dynamics. Primal's acute senses allowed him to navigate the forest seamlessly, picking up on subtleties that elude the untrained observer. The importance of awareness engaging with nature cultivates mindfulness, a practice echoed within BDSM dynamics. Mindfulness promotes an acute awareness of oneself and one's surroundings, enabling participants to better understand their own needs while attuning to their partner's signals. This heightened sense of awareness transforms the experience, allowing for richer connections and deeper exploration. Primal's ability to read the forest mirrors a top's duty in a BDSM scene, remaining attentive to their partner's responses, adjusting as needed to ensure a balanced exchange. This vigilance nurtures the trust necessary for power dynamics to flourish. Myth and reality. To some, Primal may seem a fantastical being, yet his existence lies firmly rooted in reality. This duality speaks to the narratives constructed around BDSM, which can often be shrouded in misconceptions. By acknowledging the tangible aspects of these dynamics, individuals can dismantle myths surrounding power exchange, paving the way for open dialogue and acceptance. Understanding that individuals like Primal exist beyond legend encourages those intrigued by BDSM to explore their curiosities without fear. They come to realize that engaging with one's primal instincts does not diminish humanity. Rather, it enhances the richness of the human experience. The town had long since forgotten the boy who had vanished into the woods, leaving only whispers of his legend. But to the forest, Primal was no legend. He was a living, breathing testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unbreakable bond between man and nature. Legends often rise from the ashes of truth, born out of collective memory and cultural narrative. Yet, beneath the stories lies the essence of individuals who forge paths of their own, leaving behind tales that inspire and captivate. The resilience of the human spirit. Primal embodies the fortitude inherent in humanity, an unwavering spirit that refuses to be extinguished. Similarly, those participating in BDSM exemplify resilience, facing societal judgments while pursuing their desires unapologetically. This courage to embrace one's true self reinforces the idea that power lies in vulnerability, a theme central to both primal instincts and intimate exploration. Each practitioner's journey contributes to a broader narrative of acceptance and understanding. By challenging norms, they pave the way for future generations to navigate their own desires free from shame or stigma. The bond between man and nature. The relationship between humanity and the natural world is intricate and multifaceted. Primal's existence showcases a profound connection to the earth, illustrating the symbiotic relationship that can exist between beings. In the world of BDSM, this bond is mirrored in the partnerships formed through consent and trust, highlighting the potential for harmony within power dynamics. Recognizing this interconnectedness can lead to a deeper appreciation of both nature and the choices made within intimate relationships. Individuals become aware of their impact on the world around them, fostering a sense of responsibility as stewards of both their desires and the environments they inhabit. With the sun sinking into the earth, shadows stretched and swayed, casting an untamed ballet across the dense underbrush. Primal took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp pine-scented air. This was his realm, and he was its guardian, a role he embraced with every fiber of his being. As dusk descends upon the forest, a transformation occurs, a shift in energy that invites reflection and introspection. The change of light holds transformative power, influencing moods and perspectives. In BDSM, shifts in atmosphere can dramatically alter the dynamics of a scene. The dimming light evokes a sense of mystery and anticipation, amplifying arousal and inviting exploration. Primal's awareness of these transitions underscores the importance of setting the stage for intimacy, where the interplay of light and shadow creates a landscape ripe for discovery. Understanding these nuances fosters creativity and spontaneity within BDSM interactions. Partners become attuned to the ebb and flow of energy, navigating their desires with newfound insight and passion. Embracing the guardian role. Taking on the mantle of a guardian implies a deep sense of commitment to protect, guide, and nurture those you hold dear. In the realm of BDSM, this role can manifest as a dominant partner, ensuring the safety and well-being of their submissive. Primal's dedication to safeguarding the forest illustrates the vital importance of accountability within power dynamics, a principle that must be upheld to foster trust and intimacy. Protectiveness and care define the essence of successful explorations, allowing space for vulnerability while maintaining safety. These tenets are crucial for nurturing healthy relationships, enabling partners to delve into their desires without fear. The yearning for connection often sparks curiosity, a desire to bridge the gap between worlds. The call of curiosity propels us into the unknown, prompting questions that lead to growth and understanding. In BDSM, this exploration often involves venturing beyond established boundaries, challenging preconceived notions of pleasure and pain. Primal's desire to understand those dwelling outside the forest reflects the necessity of curiosity in expanding one's horizons, whether through new experiences or different perspectives on power dynamics. Opening oneself to new possibilities enriches the journey, encouraging individuals to take risks and confront their fears. Engaging with the unfamiliar paves the way for profound insights and transformative experiences. Bridging worlds, bridging the divide between primal instincts and civilized behaviors necessitates understanding. Primal's longing to connect with the human world reveals an intrinsic desire for companionship and shared experiences. Similarly, those who engage in BDSM seek to reconcile their desires with societal norms, navigating complex emotions in pursuit of authenticity. By fostering dialogue and fostering connections with those outside their community, individuals can dispel misconceptions and build bridges of understanding. This openness enriches the BDSM experience as partners learn to appreciate the diverse range of human experiences that shape their desires. Conclusion: in the rich tapestry of human experience, the intersection of nature, identity, and desire presents a compelling narrative. Through the lens of Primal's journey, we uncover the profound connections between the wild and the intricacies of BDSM, encapsulating the essence of power exchange and primal play. Nature offers a sanctuary for self-discovery, paralleling the explorations within the BDSM community where trust, consent, and vulnerability reign supreme. As individuals continue to navigate their desires and grapple with societal expectations, they emerge stronger, more resilient, and deeply connected to their authentic selves. Ultimately, embracing one's primal instincts cultivates not only a greater understanding of the self, but also a recognition of the interconnectedness that binds humanity to the natural world. As we navigate the delicate dance between power and surrender, let us honor the journey, celebrating the transformation that unfolds within the woods and beyond. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves painted the forest floor with a mosaic of reds and golds, Primal made a decision. He would venture into the human world. The idea filled him with excitement and fear in equal measure, but the pull was too strong to ignore. With a heavy heart, he packed a few meager possessions into a makeshift sack, his eyes lingering on the familiar sights of the woods. As he approached the edge of the trees, the distant murmur of human voices grew louder. His steps slowed, his instincts on high alert. The smell of wood smoke tickled his nose, and he could make out the faint outline of buildings through the foliage. His paws tread softly on the damp earth as he crept closer, until finally he stepped out of the shadows into a clearing. The solitary figure, Primal, his curiosity piqued. A young girl, no more older than him, stumbled into the clearing, her eyes wide with fear. She was lost, her voice trembling as she called out for help. Primal's instincts were torn between his wariness of humans and a deep-seated protective instinct. He stepped forward, his heart pounding as the girl's cries grew more desperate. Her eyes widened when she saw the beast, and she stumbled backwards. Primal raised a paw in a gesture of peace, his fur bristling slightly as he tried to appear less intimidating. She took a cautious step closer, and he could see the tears glistening in her eyes. He had never felt such a strange mix of emotions before: fear, pity, and an unexplainable urge to help. He took another step towards her, and she didn't flee. The woman, barely more than a girl, was dressed in tattered clothes and had dirt smudged on her cheeks. She looked at him, her voice shaking as she spoke. "I don't have much time," she said, gulping for air. "Some bikers are after me. They want to kill me. I don't know why." Her eyes searched his, desperation etched in every line of her face. Primal knew nothing of bikers, but he understood fear. He nodded, his fur ruffling slightly. Hide with me, he offered, his voice a low, gentle rumble. She looked at him warily, but the sincerity in his gaze seemed to win her over. Together, they retreated back into the woods, her hand in his paw, her tiny warmth surprisingly comforting. They moved swiftly, the way through the dense underbrush. The girl stumbled, and he picked her up, carrying her with surprising ease. Her weight was nothing compared to the bucks he'd brought down in his youth. They arrived at a hidden hollow, a small cave that had been his refuge many times before. "This is where I live," he said, his voice echoing in the small space. From the outside, the cave looked like any other part of the natural landscape. But as they stepped inside, the girl's eyes widened in amazement. Primal had crafted a small kitchen area with a stone hearth and a wooden bench. Pots and pans hung from the ceiling, and a metal pot sat atop the fire, filled with a stew that had been simmering all day. The scent of roasting meat and vegetables filled the air, making her stomach growl. The shower is a remarkable feat of ingenuity, nestled within the rugged walls of the cave. It starts with a natural spring high up in the mountains, like a magical fountain providing a continuous source of fresh, clear water. From this spring, Primal crafted channels out of wood and stone fitting theme together, like intricate puzzle pieces. As you approach the shower area, you see the impressive fire pit built beneath a large stone reservoir. When lit, the fire heats the stones, turning them into natural radiators. The water flows over these hot stones, warming up as it travels along the channels. This heated water is then stored in a sizable wooden tank, insulated with moss and clay to keep it cozy and warm, like a blanket wrapped around it. The piping system, made from hollowed-out branches, carries the warm water to the shower area. The wooden showerhead, a testament to Primal's resourcefulness, releases the water in a steady stream when you twist the handle. The warm water cascades down, mixing with the earthy scent of the cave and creating a serene, almost magical atmosphere. The shower area itself is framed by the natural beauty of the cave, with rough stone walls that glisten with moisture. The sunlight filters in from a small opening above, casting dappled light on the scene and adding to the enchanting ambience. The sound of the water flowing and the crackling of the fire create a soothing symphony, making this natural shower a haven in the heart of the wilderness. The girl, whose name was revealed to be Lila, was initially wary of Primal's offer to stay in his cave. The idea of being in such close proximity to a creature that looked like a man but was definitely not, was unnerving. Yet the warmth of the fire and the smell of the stew began to dissolve her fear. She knew she had to trust someone, and Primal's gentle demeanor was more comforting than the cold woods. As they sat by the fire, Primal's fur was the only sound, a soft rustle as he shifted his weight. Lila's eyes grew heavy with exhaustion, and she leaned against his side. He felt her body tense when she realized their closeness, but made no move to withdraw. Instead, he placed a comforting paw on her shoulder, and she relaxed, allowing herself to be lulled by the crackling flames and the steady rhythm of his breathing. With the stew finished, Primal offered it to her. She took the wooden spoon he presented and began to eat, the warmth spreading through her body and bringing life back to her cheeks. She glanced up at him, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. Without thinking, she reached over and brushed the hair from his face. He flinched, his eyes flashing with something that could have been anger or fear, but she saw the vulnerability in them and knew she had to be careful. "Thank you," she whispered. He stiffened, his eyes flashing with something akin to a warning. "Don't touch me," he growled, his grip on her wrist tightening. Lila's heart raced, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pulling away from him. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to thank you." Primal's grip loosened, and he released her wrist. "I know," he said, his voice soft. "It's just, I'm not used to humans." His eyes searched hers, trying to convey his apology without words. Lila nodded, her own fear dissipating. "I understand." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire the only sound in the cave. Then she spoke again, her voice tentative. "Can I ask why you're out here? Why are you not with your family?" Primal sighed, his fur ruffling as he leaned back against the rock wall. I don't have a family, he said. Not anymore. He paused, his eyes distant, lost in a memory. I was born here in the woods. My mother was a creature like me, but my father was human. They didn't live together, but he would visit sometimes. He taught me things, but people were afraid of me. Lila's hand hovered in the air for a moment before dropping back to her side. She felt a pang of sympathy for this creature, who was so clearly torn between two worlds. What happened? She asked softly. Primal's gaze dropped to the ground, his shoulders slumping. My mother was taken, he said, his voice thick with pain. Hunters. They didn't see her for what she was. He paused, his eyes misting over. After that, my father wouldn't take care of me. He was too scared of what I might become. So he left me here, with only the woods as my teacher. Lila's eyes filled with tears at his story, and she reached out to touch his paw again, more gently this time. I'm sorry, she said. I can't imagine what that was like. Primal pushes her away, his eyes flashing with a fierce protectiveness. You're safe here, his voice rumbling in the enclosed space. Rest. I'll keep you. Exhaustion eventually overtakes Lila, and she succumbs to sleep, her head pillowed on a makeshift bed of furs. Primal keeps his vigil, his eyes flickering from the fire to the entrance of the cave. He can't shake the feeling that her presence here in his sanctuary has changed everything. He's never felt responsible for another being before, and the weight of it is both terrifying and exhilarating. When Lila opens her eyes, the cave looks different. The fire has been reduced to embers, casting a warm glow over everything. She sits up, her body feeling cleaner than it has in days. Looking down, she finds herself in a soft dress made from fabric she doesn't recognize. Her cuts and bruises from her ordeal are all looked after. The dirt that once clung to her skin has been replaced by a gentle scent of lavender and sage. Her gaze lands on Primal, who is still awake, his eyes never leaving the cave's entrance. He notices her movement and turns to look at her, his expression unreadable. You're awake, he says, his voice a gentle rumble in the quiet. What happened? Her voice still thick with sleep. She looks down at herself, the soft fabric of the dress brushing against her skin. Primal nods towards the shower. It works, he says. It's a spring up in the mountains. I figured out how to channel the water here. Primal's eyes lit up as he started explaining, his voice carrying an unguarded excitement, like a child eager to share a newfound secret. The shower, it works. See, there's this spring up in the mountains like a magic fountain or something. I found it when I was exploring. It's so cool. I made these channels out of wood and stone, kind of like puzzle pieces, to bring the water here. He gestured animatedly, his hands mimicking the flow of water down the makeshift channels. And the heating part, that's my favorite, he continued, his voice bubbling with enthusiasm. I built this fire pit under the big stone. When the fire burns, it makes the stones all hot and toasty. The water flows over the hot stones and gets warm. It's like magic. Then, I store the heated water in this big wooden tank. I even put moss and clay around it too. Primal led the way to the shower area, pointing to the various parts with pride. Look, I made these pipes from branches. They're hollow inside. The warm water travels through them and comes out here, he said, indicating the wooden shower head. You just twist this handle and whoosh. Warm water, just like in the stories. His eyes sparkled with a mixture of pride and childlike wonder as he finished his explanation. I figured it all out by myself. It's like the forest helped me, you know? Everything just fits together perfectly. It's amazing what you can do with the things nature gives you. Lila stared at him, bewildered by his enthusiasm. But if you have this amazing cave shower, why are you as dirty as the ground itself? She asked, her confusion evident. Lila's eyes widen with amazement. Can I try it? She asks hesitantly. Primal nods, a hint of pride in his posture. Of course, he says, gesturing to the shower. Just pull that. Lila stands and approaches the shower, dropping the fabric, her movements more graceful than any creature Primal has ever seen. She glances back, a playful smirk playing on her lips, and pulls the lever. Water cascades down, and she steps under the flow, her eyes closing in pleasure. Primal watches, his breath hitching in his throat as the water runs over her body, revealing her smooth skin and curves that had been hidden beneath the dirt and grime. He feels a strange, unfamiliar stirring in his chest and a heat that has nothing to do with the fire. He clears his throat, his voice gruff. "Why are you doing this?" he asks, his eyes never leaving her. Lila opens her eyes, the water streaming down her face like tears. "Doing what?" she asks. Primal's gaze is intense, his voice gruff. "This, you're teasing me." Lila blinks, the water running down her face in rivulets.
What?
"No," she protests, but her cheeks flush a deep pink. She tries to cover herself, her hands shaking. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Primal's eyes narrow, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean you're sorry?" His voice is gruff, his body tensing with confusion and something he doesn't quite understand. Lila steps out from under the shower, the water still cascading around her. She wraps the hide around herself, the fabric clinging to her curves as she turns to face him. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," she says, her voice small. "It's just that I haven't had anyone to talk to in a long time, and you're the first person I've seen in days." Primal's gaze is torn between the fire and the girl before him. He can't help but feel a strange attraction, an urge to protect her and be close to her, even though she's human. "Why are you here?" Lila takes a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I told you I was running. But I didn't tell you why," she admits, her voice shaky. "I was a sex worker. Those bikers, they were clients. They didn't like that I didn't want to go through with it anymore. They said I owed them." Primal's eyes widen with a mix of understanding and confusion. He had never encountered such terms or concepts in his life in the woods. But he could sense the fear and pain in Lila's voice, and that was enough to ignite a protective instinct within. "I don't know what a sex worker is," he admits, his voice gentle but firm. "But I can see that those men have hurt you, and that makes me angry." "They won't find you here," he promises, his voice dropping to a low growl. The fur on his back rises slightly, a reflection of his rising anger and determination. "I will protect you," Primal continues, his eyes meeting Lila's with unwavering resolve. "This forest is my home." Lila feels a mix of relief and gratitude. Despite the differences in their worlds, she knows she has found a protector in Primal. She tightens the hide around her and steps closer, finding solace in his presence. "Thank you," she whispers, her eyes downcast. The tension in the cave is palpable, a silent dance of attraction and fear. Primal turns away, trying to compose himself, his mind racing with thoughts he's never had before. He's aware of her every movement as she dries herself, the soft patter of the water echoing in the small space. When she's finished, Lila approaches him, the hide wrapped tightly around her body. "I'm sorry," she says again, her voice small and apologetic. "I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable." Primal nods, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's not you," he murmurs, his voice thick with something she doesn't understand. "It's just, I've never been around anyone like you before. Get dressed." Lila takes a step closer, her hand hovering over his messy hair. "You should shower too," she says gently. "You'll feel better." Primal's eyes narrow, and before she knows it, he has pushed her to the ground, his paws pinning her down. "Quiet," he commands, his voice a harsh whisper. "Stay here." He grabs his wolf headgear, a knife, his fur sack, and some supplies. With his heart pounding, he rushes out of the cave. His instincts scream at him to protect her, to keep her safe from the humans that had hurt her, and from the ones that would come looking. The night air was cool and still, with the scent of the girl's fear following him like an invisible trail. Primal moved swiftly through the forest, his ears twitching as he listened for any sign of the bikers. The forest was his ally, whispering secrets only he could hear. The distant sound of engines grew louder, a menacing growl that made his back rise. He knew they were coming, and he wouldn't let them get near her. The thought of Lila in danger fueled his determination. Primal sprinted through the underbrush, his powerful legs devouring the distance with ease. His eyes seemed to glow with fierce determination, and the trees seemed to part for him as he ran. The scent of gasoline and leather drifted on the wind, mingling with Lila's fear, a beacon that guided him back to her. As he distanced himself from the cave, he slowed, his breaths coming in quiet, controlled pants. He crouched low, peering out into the clearing. His nose twitched, catching the unmistakable scent of gasoline and leather. The bikers were close, their engines a growling menace in the night. He counted them, all armed and looking more dangerous than any creature he'd faced before. His mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan to protect Lila. The instinct to flee battled with his newfound desire to protect her. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions. Not now. Primal had to make his way back to the cave after scouting for the bikers. Clutching his supplies, he cautiously stepped. The forest seemed to close in around him as he moved stealthily, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to be sure the path was clear before he could return to Lila. Satisfied that the immediate area was safe, Primal quickly made his way back to the cave. He entered quietly, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. He found Lila where he had left her, her eyes wide with worry. He turned to Lila, his eyes a mix of fierce protection and regret. "You have to go," he whispered, his voice a low rumble. "They're looking for you, and if they find you here—" He didn't finish the sentence, the unspoken threat hanging in the air like smoke. He could see the fear in her eyes, mirroring his own. Lila's face paled, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She tightened the hide around herself, her eyes darting around the cave for any escape route. Primal's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I'll create a diversion," he said, his voice firmer now. "Follow the path to the east. It will lead you to a hidden trail. Stay low and move quickly." She hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Primal nodded, feeling a surge of protectiveness. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe. As she slipped out of the cave and into the night, the fabric he gave her, like a ghost in the wind, fluttered as she ran. Crouched low, he moved silently through the underbrush, positioning himself between the cave and the bikers. The engines grew louder, the growling machines tearing through the night. Primal bared his teeth, his muscles coiled and ready. The forest was his domain, and tonight, he would show these intruders the fury of a guardian. Her eyes widen with fear, but she nods, understanding the gravity of the situation. She moves quickly, gathering her thoughts and slipping into the shadows of the woods. Primal watches her, his heart aching. He's never remembered feeling this way before, the need to keep someone safe burning like a wildfire in his chest. The bikers' voices grow louder as they enter the clearing, their laughter cutting through the night. Primal's fur stands on end, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. He knows he can't take them alone, but he can't abandon her either. He watches them from the shadows, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. They're searching, their flashlights piercing the darkness like predators hunting their prey. Her eyes are wide with terror. He watches as she retreats further into the shadows of the woods, the last sliver of moonlight painting her features with a soft glow before she's swallowed by darkness. Primal takes one last look at her, his mind racing with a fierce need to keep her safe. He turns his gaze to his paws, flexing the powerful digits. His teeth are equally deadly, and he imagines sinking them into the thick neck of one of the bikers. The thought sends a shiver down his spine, not from fear, but from the primal instinct to fight, to defend what's his. But these are humans, with their strange rules and weapons that could end his life with a single shot. He takes a deep breath, pushing down the urge to charge into the night and tear them apart. His mind races as he considers his options. He can't outrun them, not with his size and their machines. He cannot fight them, not with their numbers and firepower. But he can use the woods to his advantage, leading them on a wild goose chase that will leave them lost and disoriented. Primal moved swiftly through the underbrush, His senses heightened as he searched for Lila. The scent of her fear lingered in the air, guiding him like an invisible thread. He knew she was hiding somewhere close, and he needed to find her before the bikers did. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. Primal's eyes scanned the darkness, and his ears twitched at the slightest sound. Finally, he spotted her, crouched behind a thick bush, her body tense and trembling. Lila, he whispered urgently, crouching beside her. She turned to face him, her eyes wide with fear. Bait, he said, his voice a mix of urgency and regret. Her body stiffened at his words, and she stared at him in disbelief. Primal could see the fear and uncertainty in her eyes, but he also saw a flicker of understanding. She knew it was the only way to ensure their safety. Taking a deep breath, Lila whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. What? She said, her voice shaky but resolute. What do I need to do? Primal's heart ached with the burden he was placing on her, but there was no other choice. He leaned closer, his eyes piercing through the darkness. I'll create a distraction and lead them away. When they follow me, you'll need to run to the east. Lila nodded again, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. She tightened the hide around her, readying herself for what lay ahead. Primal placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Stay low and move quickly, he said softly. I'll find you once it's safe. As Primal moved to position himself between the bikers and Lila, he could hear the engines growing louder. He steeled himself for the confrontation, his mind focused on protecting her at all costs. The forest was his ally, and tonight, he would use every ounce of its power to keep her safe. With a heavy heart, Primal emerges from the woods, his massive frame silhouetted by the moon. The bikers spot him immediately, their laughter turning to snarls of anger and disgust. They know what he is, what he represents, something different, something they fear. Running into the woods, leading them away from his locations with every ounce of speed and stealth he possesses. The chase is on, the roar of the bikes a cacophony in the serene night. Primal weaves through the trees, his powerful legs eating up the ground. The bikers follow, their lights bobbing in the darkness, their shouts of rage, a stark contrast to the usual whispers of the forest. He knows he can't outrun them forever, but every second he buys her is a victory. Lila watches him go, her heart in her throat. She knows what he's doing and knows the danger he's putting himself in. But she has no choice. She's the bait, and she has to be ready for when they realize they've been led astray. Running back to the cave, her hands shake as she unties the fur and dresses in the clean clothes he's provided. The white fabric clings to her damp skin, but she feels a strange sense of power in her vulnerability. She steps out of the cave, the night air cool against her bare flesh. She walks to the nearest tree, her eyes searching for the perfect spot. Once she finds it, she takes a deep breath and ties herself to the trunk of the tree. The rope bites into her wrists, the rough bark digging into her skin. She closes her eyes, willing herself to stay calm. The sound of the engines grows closer, and she knows she's made the right choice. The first biker rounds the corner, his light sweeping through the woods. It lands on her, and she feels like a deer in headlights. He stops, his eyes widening in shock and lust. He's a mountain of a man, his leather jacket creaking as he climbs off his bike. The smell of grease and sweat fills the air, making her stomach churn. He approaches her, his steps heavy and deliberate. The forest floor crunches under his boots, each step echoing ominously through the quiet night. His eyes are fixed on her, a predatory gleam in his gaze, and his mouth twists into a cruel grin. As he closes the distance, the air seems to grow colder, and her heart races in her chest. Primal watches from behind the tree, his muscles coiled like a spring. He's never felt rage like this before, a white-hot fury that makes his blood boil. His eyes are locked on the man, his breathing shallow. The biker's hand reaches out to touch her, and that's when Primal strikes. He leaps from the shadows, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. The man's eyes widen in terror as Primal's powerful paws land on his shoulders. The creature's claws dig into his leather jacket, his teeth snapping mere inches from the man's throat. The biker stumbles backward, his hand fumbling for the gun at his side. But Primal is faster, knocking the weapon out of his grasp with a swift swipe of his clawed paw. The other bikers hear the commotion and come rushing over, their lights bobbing like fireflies in the dark. Lila's heart races, the ropes biting into her skin as she pretends to struggle against them. Primal snarls, standing tall, his fur bristling with anger. The bikers form a circle around him, their eyes wide with fear and disbelief. "Get away from her," one of them snarls, poipoing his gun at Primal. But Primal doesn't flinch. He's lived in the wild his whole life, and he knows fear is a weapon they can't comprehend. Lila feels a surge of hope. Primal, so much more than she thought, a fierce protector with a gentle heart. She watches as he uses his size and strength to keep the bikers at bay. His eyes a promise, a silent vow that he'll keep her safe. The biker with the gun takes a step closer, his hand trembling. "What the fuck is this?" he spits, his eyes darting from the terrified girl to the creature that's standing between her and them. Primal's muscles tighten, ready to pounce. "I said get away from her," the man repeats, his voice cracking. The other bikers edge closer, their fear a palpable force in the air. One of them laughs, a high-pitched sound that's more nerves than amusement. "Look at the dirty old woodsman," he sneers. "Thinks he's some kind of animal, doesn't he?" The words hit Primal like a blow. He's never seen himself that way, never thought of his life in the woods as being less than. But as he looks at Lila, her eyes wide and terrified, he knows that he's more than just a creature of the wild. He's her protector, her savior. He's the difference between life and death. With a roar that shakes the very earth beneath them, Primal lunges at the biker with a gun, his teeth finding purchase in the man's neck. The biker's eyes bulge with shock and pain as Primal's jaws clamp down, the crunch of bone and slickness of blood filling the clearing. The other bikers stumble back, their bravado replaced with primal fear as they watch their friend fall to the ground, his life draining away with every heartbeat. Lila's scream pierces the night, a raw and primal sound of terror as she watches the scene unfold. The man's lifeless body hits the dirt, his throat torn open, a gruesome testament to Primal's power. She had seen the kindness in Primal's eyes, felt his gentle touch, but she had never imagined he could be this brutal. The other bikers recoil in horror, their fear of the creature in front of them now overriding their lust for revenge. They stumble back, eyes wide with shock and disbelief, the smell of blood thick in the air. "You fucking killed him," her voice trembling with fear and revulsion. Primal snaps his teeth closed, tearing through flesh, and looks at Lila. Her eyes are wide with terror, the realization of his true nature dawning on her. He knows he's crossed a line, that she sees him not as a protector, but as a monster. The man's lifeless body lies at his feet, a grim reminder of what he's capable of. The remaining bikers stumble back, their faces a mask of fear and revulsion. The one who had sneered moments ago now points his gun, shaking uncontrollably. "You fucking animal," he yells, his voice cracking. "You're gonna pay for this." Primal's eyes narrow, his grip on the biker's throat tightening. "Leave," he commands, his voice a low rumble that seems to echo through the very trees. "Take him and leave." The bikers don't need any more convincing. They scramble to their feet, their eyes never leaving Primal. One of them grabs his fallen friend's body, heaving it onto the back of his bike with a grunt. The engine roars to life, the headlights piercing the darkness as they speed away, their taillights fading into the night. Primal approaches her, his eyes dark with a hunger that wasn't there before. He reaches out a clawed paw and, with surprising gentleness, unties the ropes. "You can never tell anyone what you've seen," his voice a gruff whisper. "You can never leave now." Lila nods, her heart pounding in her chest. She wants to go home, to the safety and familiarity of her old life, but she knows that's no longer an option. She looks into Primal's eyes, searching for the kindness she had seen in him earlier, but all she finds is a wild, untamed beast. She swallows her fear, understanding that she has to survive, to find a way to live in this new reality. With the bikers gone for now, they make their way back to the cave. The tension in the air is palpable as they move quietly through the forest. Primal leads the way, his senses on high alert. Lila follows closely behind, her eyes darting nervously as she tries to stay calm. The cave comes into view, and they both feel a slight sense of relief. Days pass, and Lila settles into a strange rhythm in the cave. She helps Primal hunt and gather food, learns to appreciate the simple comforts of the fire and clean water. She watches as he tends to her wounds, his touch surprisingly gentle despite his rough exterior. But every time she brings up leaving, he refuses, his eyes flashing with a fierce possessiveness that sends a chill down her spine. Primal remains a creature of the woods, refusing to clean himself or change his tattered clothes. His fur is matted, and his eyes hold a wildness she's grown to recognize as a warning. Yet, she sees moments of humanity in him, a sadness that echoes her own, a need to connect that mirrors her own loneliness. Days stretch into weeks, and Lila finds herself adapting to this new primitive life. She learns to skin rabbits and fish from the nearby stream, the once disturbing tasks now a comforting routine. Primal watches her, his gaze often lingering on her body as she works, and she can't help but feel a strange thrill at his attention. Despite his beastly nature, he's never hurt her, never made a move that wasn't protective. One day, she decides it's time to tackle the grime that clings to him like a second skin. She approaches him with a firm look in her eyes, holding a makeshift loofah made from dried leaves and a bar of soap. "You're going to clean up," she says, her voice firm but gentle. Primal looks at her, his eyes wary, his body tense. "Why?" he asks, his voice a low rumble. Lila holds up the loofah and soap. "Because," she says firmly, "you stink. And because I can't stand looking at you like this anymore." She steps closer, her heart racing. "You're not just a creature of the woods," she whispers. "You're more than that. You're a man." Primal watches Lila, his eyes wary, as she approaches him with determination. He can sense the change in her, the way she's grown bolder in their time together. She's no longer the terrified girl who stumbled into his life, but a woman who's learned to stand her ground. Without warning, she lunges at him, her arms wrapping around his torso as she tries to guide him towards the shower. He's caught off guard by her sudden aggression, his instincts telling him to fight back. But he knows her intentions are good, so he allows her, his massive body moving awkwardly under her touch. Their struggle is clumsy, filled with laughter and grunts of effort. The water is cold at first, a shock to his system, but Lila's persistence is unyielding. He feels her hands on him, scrubbing away the layers of grime and leaves that have become a part of his fur. His eyes widen with surprise as the dirt falls away, revealing skin beneath that's smoother than he ever knew it could be. Primal tries to resist, his body tense and unaccustomed to the sensation of being handled so intimately. But Lila's touch is firm, yet gentle, and it soothes the wild beast within him. He feels himself relaxing, his muscles loosening under her ministrations. They stumble and slip in the makeshift shower, the water turning brown with the dirt that's washed away from his body. And then it happens. The contact of her hand on a certain part of him sends a bolt of pleasure through him that's unlike anything he's ever felt before. He's instantly hard, and she gasps, her eyes widening as she realizes what's happened. She tries to ignore it, focusing on her task, but it's difficult to miss. She feels a blush creeping up her neck as she reaches for the soap, her heart racing. "Turn around," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. Primal complies, his muscles tightening as he turns his back to her. The warm water cascades down his fur, washing away the last of the grime. Lila's hand trembles as she pours the soap into her palm, her eyes locked on the ground. She doesn't dare look at him, not when she can feel the heat of his arousal. Her eyes trace the contours of his powerful frame, the fur jacket that once covered him now tossed away, revealing the rippling muscles that adorn his body. The mud runs in rivulets down his broad back, pooling at the base of his spine before disappearing into the crevice of his firm buttocks. She tries to avert her gaze, to focus on the task at hand, but it's like trying to ignore a raging bonfire in a snowstorm. Her breath catches in her throat as she watches the water slide over his sculpted physique, highlighting every taut muscle and scar earned from a life of survival. Lila's hand shakes slightly as she raises the loofah, her eyes flicking up to meet in the reflection of the water droplets on the cave wall. Primal's gaze is intense, his eyes dark with a mix of confusion and something else, something primal and unmistakable. She clears her throat, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "Turn around," she repeats, her tone a little shakier than before. Slowly, with a grace that belies his size, Primal turns, his powerful muscles rippling with the movement. Lila takes a deep breath and begins to scrub his chest, her touch tentative at first, but growing more confident as she goes. The feel of his skin beneath her hands is unlike anything she's ever felt, warm, smooth, and surprisingly human. But when she reaches the base of his stomach, his body stiffens, and before she can react, his paw clamping down on her throat. His eyes are a fiery amber, the pupils dilated with arousal. He's not squeezing, not yet, but the message is clear. This is his territory, and she's trespassing. Lila's breath catches in her throat, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. Primal's grip is gentle but firm, his thumb resting lightly on her pulse point. She can feel the heat of his breath on her face, his nostrils flaring as he takes in her scent. His eyes are locked on hers, searching for any sign of a fight. Lila's no stranger to fighting for what she wants. Her time on the streets has taught her to be strong, to never back down from a challenge. And as much as she fears this creature, who's only just a man, she also feels a strange thrill at the power dynamic playing out between them. Primal's eyes widen in surprise, the sting of her palm against his cheek bringing him back to reality. He releases her throat, his paw hovering in the air for a moment before dropping to his side. A low growl rumbles in his chest, not of anger, but of arousal. He's intrigued by her spirit, by the way she's not afraid to stand up to him. But Lila's had enough. She's tired of being afraid, tired of being a victim. She shoves him back, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Don't you dare," she says, her voice shaking with emotion. "You're dirty, and I'm only trying to help you, sir." The look of shock on Primal's face is almost comical, his paws hovering in the air. He's never had anyone stand up to him like this, especially not a girl. But instead of anger, he feels something else, excitement. He's lived in the woods for so long, devoid of the complexities of human emotion, that he's forgotten what it's like to be challenged. Lila's eyes are ablaze with defiance, her body tense and ready for a fight. Primal can't help but admire her spirit. But as the creature of the woods, he knows that dominance is key to survival. He steps closer to her, his muscles rippling with power. "Mine," he growls, his voice a deep rumble that shakes the very air around them. But instead of cowering, she stands her ground, her chin raised and her eyes flashing. "I belong to no one," she spits, her voice filled with the fire of rebellion. Primal's grip tightens around her wrists, but she doesn't flinch. He can see the challenge in her gaze, the fight in her soul. The creature in him revels in the confrontation, his nostrils flaring with excitement. He likes her, the way she refuses to be his. But he also knows that she's pushing boundaries that could get her hurt. He yanks her closer, their faces mere inches apart. "Mine," he snarls, his breath hot against her cheek. But Lila is not so easily intimidated. Jerking her head back, her teeth bared in a snarl that would make any self-respecting alley cat proud. "The fuck I am," she spits, trying to yank her arms free. Her heart is racing, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Primal's grip tightened momentarily, but then he let go, his eyes searching hers for understanding. "Sorry," he murmured, his voice a mix of frustration and regret. "I didn't mean to scare you." Still trembling, Lila stepped back. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice shaky but firm. Primal took a deep breath, his gaze steady. I need to keep you safe from those bikers. I don't know what else to do." His eyes softened, reflecting his inner turmoil. He looked around the cave, his mind racing for a solution. Finally, he noticed a thick chain lying among some old tools. He picked it up and turned back to Lila. "I need you here," he said softly, his voice filled with regret. "It's the only way to make sure they don't take you from me." With careful movements, Primal wrapped the thick chain around her wrists and secured it to the rough stone formation in the cave. The cold metal bit into her skin, sending shivers down her spine. His eyes never left hers as he worked, his actions deliberate yet gentle, trying to reassure her through his careful movements. "I'll be back soon," he promised, his voice a low rumble. "Stay here and stay quiet. I won't let them take you from me." Lila nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but filled with a glimmer of trust. As Primal stepped back into the shadows, ready to confront the danger, he felt a fierce determination to protect her at all costs. She's mostly naked before him, exposed and now chained and vulnerable, his eyes raking over her body. "Mine," he repeats, his voice a low, primal growl that resonates through her bones. Lila's chest heaves with the effort of her breathing, her heart hammering in her ears. She's never felt more terrified or more alive. Without a word, leaving Lila chained to the wall, the silence stretches out, punctuated only by the drip of water from the showerhead and the distant howl of a wolf. The hours crawl by, the shadows lengthening and deepening until she can't tell if it's midday or mid-afternoon. The fire they built for warmth is now a pile of smoldering embers, the heat a faint memory. Lila's fear is a living, breathing entity in the cave, coiling around her like a python. She tries to keep herself busy, to distract from the gnawing dread that tells her he might not come back. She paces in her makeshift cage, the chain rattling with every step, the cold stone biting into her bare feet. Her thoughts run wild, conjuring images of Primal lying hurt somewhere, or worse, captured by the very bikers he'd fought off. The usual sounds of the forest are muted by the echo of her own breathing, the crackle of the dying fire a sad reminder of the comforting presence she's lost. She huddles under a fur blanket he'd left behind, his scent faint but reassuring. Yet, the warmth it provides is no match for the chill that's set into her bones. Nightfall brings with it a symphony of animal calls, the chorus of the wild serenading Lila's loneliness. The darkness is a shroud that wraps around the cave, thick and suffocating. She huddles closer to the embers, the warmth a feeble defense against the cold grip of doubt that tightens around her heart. Every rustle in the underbrush sends her pulse racing, every crack of a twig a potential herald of doom. Then, the sound of heavy footsteps, a familiar gait that sends her heart soaring with hope. Primal stumbles into the cave, his fur is matted with dirt and blood, his eyes glazed with pain. Lila's breath catches in her throat as she takes in the deep gashes that mar his body, the crimson staining his body a reminder of his mortality. "Primal," she whispers, her voice hoarse from screaming. His only response is a low, pained growl, his body sagging with exhaustion. She can see the effort it takes for him to stay upright, his muscles trembling with the strain. He stumbles closer, his gaze locked on hers, and she sees the fear in his eyes fear for her. With trembling hands, she reaches out to touch his body, feeling the sticky warmth of his blood. "What happened?" she asks, her voice shaking. Primal's breathing is labored, his chest heaving with the effort. "Bikers," he manages to croak out, his voice raw. "They hurt me." Panic floods Lila's system, her thoughts racing. "We have to get you cleaned up," she says, her voice firm with a kind of authority she's never had to use before. Primal nods, his eyes fluttering shut. She can see the toll the fight has taken on him, the way his body shakes with the effort to stay upright. She has to be strong for both of them now. "Let me out," she pleads, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Please, I'll help you." Primal looks at her, his eyes still wild with pain, but she sees something else there too, fear for her safety. He shakes his head, a firm, almost imperceptible no. He doesn't trust himself to be gentle, not when the creature in him is so close to the surface. Instead, he turns to the shower, his body moving with the awkwardness of a man unaccustomed to his own form. He's seen her use it before, the way the water cleanses away dirt and pain. With a roar that echoes through the cave, he charges towards it, the chains rattling behind him as he fumbles with the knob. The water hits him like a torrent, pummeling his wounds and sending shockwaves of pain through his body. He snarls and growls, the creature inside him fighting the human need for comfort, but he endures it.
He knows she's right.
He needs to be clean to heal, to be at peace for her. Lila watches him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and pity. "Please," she says, her voice softer now. "You're hurt. Let me help you. Take off your jacket." Primal turns to her, his eyes flashing with a mix of agony and defiance. He knows he needs her, but he can't bear the thought of her seeing him in such a weakened state. With a deep, resigned sigh, he nods and releases the chain from the stone formation, the metal clinking against the stone as it falls to the floor. She runs to him, her eyes scanning his injuries with a worried expression. "You need to sit under the shower," leading him to a makeshift chair of animal hides and branches. He complies, his movements stiff and painful. Lila turns on the shower, the warm spray misting the air as the droplets hit the cave floor. She's never seen him so vulnerable, so human. It's a reminder of the bond they've formed, a bond that's grown stronger with each passing day. Despite his animalistic nature, she cares for him. And now, it's her turn to protect him. "Let me help you," she whispers, her eyes searching for any sign of resistance. Primal hesitates, his instincts telling him to reject her offer. But the pain is too much, the exhaustion too overwhelming. With a low growl, he nods, allowing her to approach. Lila gently took the chain in her hands, her heart racing as she holds the shackles that bound her to the wall. The metal clinked against the stone, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. Primal watched her, his eyes never leaving hers, his body tense with the effort to remain in control. "Let me help," she said, her voice softer but no less insistent. She could see the doubt in his eyes, the conflict raging within him. But she had made her decision, and she wouldn't back down. "You can trust me," she added, her voice a whisper. Primal's eyes bore into hers as he nodded, a low growl of acceptance rumbling in his chest. He reached down, his massive paws fumbling with the padlock that held the chain in place. The metal clicked open, and she felt the cold bite of freedom as the chain fell away from her wrists. She rubbed the reddened flesh, feeling the blood rush back into her hands. But there was no time for relief. Primal's injuries were severe, and she could see the toll the confrontation had taken on him. He turned his back to her, his body a canvas of pain and exhaustion. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she must do. "You're hurt," she insisted, her voice firm but gentle. "I can't just sit here and do nothing. Let me help." Primal hesitated for a moment, then nodded again, his eyes filled with both trust and vulnerability. Lila moved closer, her hands steady as she assessed his wounds, ready to do whatever it took to aid the one who had risked so much to protect her. Primal's eyes flashed with something akin to anger, his instincts screaming at him to protect her, to keep her safe from the outside world. But he knows he can't do it, not in this state. She can see the tension in his muscles, the way he holds himself, as if bracing for a fight even in his weakened condition. Reaching out, her hand tentative as it touches his hair, matted with blood and grime from his encounter. His breath hisses through his teeth, but he doesn't pull away. Lila's movements are methodical as she works the soap into a lather, her eyes focused on his injuries. She's seen enough pain in her life to recognize the kind that comes from a fight for survival. Carefully, she applies the soapy water to his wounds, her touch gentle but firm. Primal flinches, his body tensing, but he allows her to tend to him, his trust in her unspoken but palpable. Her nakedness is a beautiful contrast to the fierce determination etched on her face. She moves with the confidence of a woman who knows what she's doing, her bare skin glistening with the spray from the shower. Primal watches her in the reflection of the water, his eyes tracing the curves of her body as she bends and stretches to reach his back as he sits in the shower. He's torn between the desire to pull her closer and the need to keep her at bay, to protect her from the beast he knows he can become. The water runs red with blood. She's thorough, her hands moving over his body with the precision of a surgeon, cleaning the gashes and bruises that cover him. His breath hitches as she reaches the deepest wound, a ragged gash that runs from his shoulder to his ribs. Her touch is gentle, her eyes filled with a fierce determination to ease his pain. As she works, Lila's naked body moves freely, unself-conscious and uninhibited. The warm spray of the shower kisses her skin, leaving it glistening. Her eyes never leave Primal's reflection in the water, studying his reaction to her touch. His growls of pain are mingled with something deeper, something that makes her stomach flutter. She's aware of her nakedness, but it's not what it used to be. It's not a weapon, nor a commodity. It's just her, stripped down to her most basic form, just as he is in his vulnerable state. Her hands glide over his shoulders, soothing the creature within and the man beneath. She's come to realize that Primal isn't just a wild beast. He's a complex being, a creature of the woods who's suffered the same pain and fear she has. And as she tends to his wounds, she sees the trust in his eyes, the same trust she's placed in him. Finally, the water ran clear, his body no longer stained with the evidence of his battle. It hangs beside the shower drying. Lila grabbed a clean cloth, gently patting him down as the last of the soap and grime were washed away. His breathing had evened out, the tension in his body slowly dissipating as the warmth of the shower enveloped him. As she continued to pat him dry, Lila couldn't help but wonder about the supplies. "Where did you get the soap and these cloths?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Primal's eyes flickered with a hint of guilt before he answered. I stole them," he admitted, his voice low. "There was a small house not far from here. I saw a chance and took them. I didn't mean any harm, but I wanted them." Lila paused for a moment, considering his words. She understood the harsh realities of survival, and she couldn't fault him for doing what was necessary. "It's okay," offering him a reassuring smile. "Thank you for sharing with me." Primal nodded, relief evident in his eyes. The connection between them grew stronger with each passing moment, forged by their shared experiences and the trust they were beginning to build. With trembling hands, she takes the fur blanket and wraps it around his massive form. His body is a landscape of muscles and scars, a map of survival and pain. She tucks it in around him, his hair a mess covering his eyes, her eyes lingering on the rise and fall of his chest as he breathes in deep, even breaths. His eyes are closing. She needs to move him to his bed of fur before he's lost in the oblivion of unconsciousness. The fire has dwindled to embers, casting a warm glow over the cave. She pulls the blanket tighter, making sure he's warm and comfortable. She can't help but stare at his naked body, the way the flickering light plays over the contours of his muscles. The fur that once covered him is small, revealing his humanity. He's not just a creature of the woods, but a man with feelings and vulnerabilities. Lila shivers. She wraps a rough-looking towel around herself, the rough fabric scraping against her skin as she dries off. She's still trembling, but not from the cold, it's from the raw, unbridled emotions that have taken hold of her. Her eyes drift to Primal's naked form, sprawled out on the makeshift bed of furs. The blanket is hardly enough to cover his frame, leaving one muscular leg and an arm bare to the firelight. His chest rises and falls with a steady rhythm of sleep, the fur and the pale, human skin beneath. The sight of him, so vulnerable, so utterly exposed, sends a bolt of something new through her, something akin to tenderness, a feeling she's never truly experienced. Her fingertips graze the softness, tracing the curves of her body. The campfire danced shadows across her skin, illuminating the contours of her flesh. The quiet of the evening was a peaceful calm. Lila's hand slipped under the fur she covered herself with, her breath hitching as she touched the sensitive skin of her stomach. Her eyes remained transfixed on Primal. The way his muscles shifted with each breath, The way his chest rose and fell, the power that lay dormant beneath the surface of his restful form. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, warming the small space between them. Her thoughts grew hazier as she allowed her imagination to wander, picturing the feel of his bare skin against her own, the weight of him pressing her into the makeshift bed. Her hand moves to her inner thigh, the heat building within her as she thinks of his touch. She's been stuck in the woods with him for what feels like an eternity.
You have been listening to
My book for 1 hour now. I suggest you hydrate and compose yourself. It's only been a few weeks yet. Those weeks have changed her in ways she never thought possible. She's seen his strength, his brutality, and his kindness. She's seen the beast in him and the man beneath the fur jacket. Her hand slid further down, fingers gliding over the soft kitten muff that shielded her own most intimate areas. With a tremble of anticipation, she touched herself, tracing the curves of her body as if for the first time. The sensation was electric, and she bit her bottom lip to stifle the moan that threatened to escape. Her movements grew bolder, mirroring the intensity of the desire that was building within her. With each slow, deliberate circle, her breath grew shallower, her heart racing. The heat between her legs grew to a fevering pitch, and she closed her eyes, allowing the image of Primal's powerful form to consume her thoughts. She imagined his calloused hands replacing hers, the gentle roughness a stark contrast to the softness of her own skin. The fantasy of his warmth enveloping her, his muscles flexing as he claimed her, sent waves of pleasure crashing through her body. Her eyes drift over his form, the lot of the fire dancing across his skin. She can't help but wonder if the bikers are gone, if it's safe for her to leave. But even as the thought enters her mind, she feels a strange sense of longing, of belonging. The woods have become her home. Primal has become her protector, her confidant, her lover. Does she truly want to leave? Does she even know who she is outside of these walls anymore? The fur on the bed stirs, Primal's muscular form shifts. He lets out a low groan in his sleep, his paws moving restlessly. Lila watches, her heart racing, as the blanket shifts and slides away from him. His cock is revealed, and it's thick, standing slightly at attention despite his unconscious state. She can't tear her eyes away, her own body responding with a heat that spreads through her like wildfires. Her hand moves of its own accord, slipping between her thighs. She's never felt such an intense attraction to anyone, let alone a creature like him. Yet here she is, her fingers dancing over her own slick kitten as she watches him toss and turn. His body is a testament to the raw power of nature, and she finds herself drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. Primal's fur stirs once more, the blanket falling away to expose his entire length. His cock juts out, thick and veined, the head glistening with precum. Lila's eyes widen, and she bites her bottom lip to stifle a gasp. He's so human, so male. The sight of him aroused sends a jolt of electricity through her body, her core tightening with need. He shifts again, his hand moving to his groin almost absent-mindedly. She watches, transfixed, as his fingers wrap around the base of his cock. He squeezes, his hips bucking slightly in his sleep. Lila's breathing quickens, her own hand mirroring his movements between her thighs. Primal's eyes fly open, snapping to hers in the firelight. A moment, she's frozen, caught in the act of her own arousal. But instead of anger or embarrassment, she sees something else in his gaze, a hunger that matches her own. Slowly, deliberately, he moves his hand away, leaving his erection uncovered. His eyes never leave hers as he rises to his feet, the fur blanket pooling around his ankles. He stands before her, a creature of the night made flesh and blood, his muscles rippling with power. His cock stands proud, his nakedness as primal and unashamed as the wilderness outside. Lila can't help but stare, her breathing shallow and ragged. His hand moves to his cock again, this time stroking it with purpose. Her eyes widen, watching as he runs his thumb over the slick head, spreading the precum in a deliberate motion. The sound of his hand against his shaft echoes in the stillness of the cave, a carnally erotic melody that sends a shiver down her spine. Her body responds, her own hand moving faster, the pressure against her clit increasing. She's so lost in the moment, her desire for him, that she doesn't notice the warm trickle down her thigh. She pees herself, an involuntary reaction to the fear and excitement that coil within her. Primal's gaze flickers downward, noticing the wetness on the stone floor. His eyes narrow, the pupils dilating with lust. He takes another step closer, his cock bobbing with each movement. Lila's hand stutters, a soft, "Please don't hurt me," slipping from her lips. The words hang in the air, a silent plea that makes his chest rumble with a low growl. It's not a sound of anger or frustration, it's one of understanding and need. He knows what she's asking for, and he knows what she's afraid of. With a swift move, he grabs her chin, forcing her to look up at him. Her eyes widen in surprise, but she doesn't struggle. Instead, she watches as he brings her face closer to the sticky mess on the floor. "This," he says, his voice a gruff rumble, "will need to be cleaned up." Lila's breath hitches as she feels the warm wetness of her pee against her cheek. For a moment, she's paralyzed with fear and embarrassment. But then she sees the glint in his eye, the way his gaze flickers between her and his still hard cock. It's a challenge, a test of her submission. And she knows she must pass it if she wants to keep him from turning into the beast she fears. With a playful glint in her own eye, she leans in, her tongue darting out to lick the urine from the floor. The taste is faintly salty, but she doesn't recoil. Instead, she meets his gaze, her eyes sparkling with a rebellious spirit. Primal's grip on her chin tightens, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing?" he asks, his voice low. The challenge is clear. She can feel the power dynamic shifting again, the tension coiling between them like a snake ready to strike. Slowly, deliberately, she reaches out and wraps her hand around his thick cock. He flinches at first, a hiss escaping his lips, but then he relaxes into her touch. For a moment, she feels a thrill of victory until he slaps her hard across the face. Her lip splits, the coppery taste of blood flooding her mouth as she falls back, the world spinning around her. She lands on her hands, the cold stone floor biting into her skin. Primal's eyes are wild, a mix of lust and dominance. He steps closer, his erection bobbing with each step, leaving a trail of pre-cum on the stone. Lila's hand flies to her face, her eyes wide with shock and pain. She crawls backwards, the rough, questionable towel slipping away, leaving her completely exposed to him. The fire casts shadows on her body, highlighting her breasts and the wetness between her thighs. His gaze follows her retreat, his nostrils flaring as he catches her scent, his hunger growing. The slap was a warning, a reminder of the beast that lurks just beneath his skin. But it's also a challenge, a dance of power and submission that she's come to understand. Her eyes never leave his as she backs away, her hand still trembling from the contact with his cock. The taste of her own blood mixes with the salty tang of her arousal, and she knows that she's crossed a line. Primal's chest heaves with the effort of controlling his urges. The scent of her fear and desire is intoxicating, the sight of her blood a siren's call. He takes a step towards her, his hand moving to his cock once more. It's not a gentle caress this time, but a firm, almost punishing grip. "You want this," he snarls, his eyes burning with lust. "You want me to fuck you like the animal you say I am." Lila's breath hitches, her eyes never leaving his. She can feel the heat of his gaze on her, the intensity of his desire. She nods, her voice a breathless whisper. Before she could say yes. With a roar that shakes the cave walls, Primal is on her, his body pressing her into the cold, unforgiving stone. His cock, still slick with precum, nudges against her entrance. She gasps as he slams into her. No gentle preamble, no tender caresses, just raw, unbridled need. The pain is sharp, searing, as he stretches her beyond what she thought possible. She cries out, her nails digging into the fur beneath her as he ruts against her, his hips moving in a primal rhythm that's as ancient as the woods themselves. The sound of their bodies slapping together fills the air, punctuated by her whimpers and his bestial grunts. He's relentless, his cock pounding into her with force that steals her breath. Yet, amidst the pain, she feels a twisted sense of pleasure, her body responding to the brutal claiming. She can feel every inch of him, his roughness scraping against her insides, his heat burning her to the core. Her legs are spread wide, her body open and vulnerable beneath his powerful frame. She's never felt so exposed, so owned. His teeth graze her neck, the pressure enough to leave a mark without breaking skin. She arches into the pain, her hips rising to meet his thrusts, inviting more inside her tight, giving kitten. With each brutal stroke, Lila feels herself slipping further into a haze of agony and ecstasy. Primal's claws dig into the fur beneath her, his hips slamming into hers a ferocity that leaves her gasping. She's lost in the sensation, her body a canvas for his primal need. Each thrust feels like a brand, a claim staked deep within her soul. Her cries are a mix of pain and pleasure, echoing off the cavern walls. His teeth find her neck again, this time sinking in, drawing a bead of blood that trickles down her spine. The sharp pain sends a jolt of electricity through her, making her back arch and her pussy clench around his cock. He groans, his grip tightening as he feels her respond to his bite. Lila's nails dig into the fur beneath her, trying to find purchase as he fucks her into the stone. The friction is brutal, each thrust a declaration of his dominance. She can feel her own orgasm building, a crescendo of sensation that threatens to shatter her. Primal's hips move faster, his strokes more demanding as he chases his own release. Her eyes roll back in her head, and she bites her lip to keep from screaming. The pain is a living, breathing entity coiling around her spine, tightening its grip with every thrust. Yet, it's the most exhilarating, most alive she's felt in years. His cock hits a spot deep inside her, sending a jolt of pleasure through her body that makes her toes curl. Lila's body quivers as the orgasm builds, her pussy clenching around him, begging for more. Primal's grip on her hips tightens, his teeth sinking deeper into her neck. He's claiming her, marking her as his. And as the pleasure overwhelms her, she knows she's his. She can't fight it anymore. She doesn't want to. Her eyes roll back in her head, and she surrenders to the feeling of his cock pounding into her, filling her completely. Her legs are shaking, her muscles screaming for relief, but she welcomes the pain. It's a reminder of the power he holds over her, a reminder that she's alive. With each thrust, Lila feels herself getting closer to the edge, her body responding to his brutal claiming. She tries to hold back, but it's futile. The pleasure is too intense, too overwhelming. Her orgasm hits like a storm, waves of it crashing through her body, making her cry out in a mix of pain and ecstasy. Daddy, no, wait. Oh, New York God Primal. Fucking meat stick. I'll need you to stop, sir. No, don't stop. Stop. Fuck, don't stop. Deeper, it hurts. Oh my God. Fucking ruin me. I'm such a fucking whore for this. Fuck. She manages to whimper something. Primal's eyes gleam with victory as he feels her pussy contract around him. He's not finished, not by a long shot. He pulls out, leaving her gasping for air, and flips her over onto her stomach. The firelight plays over her curved ass, taunting with perfection. He can't resist the urge to claim her in every way possible. Without warning, he spreads her cheeks, exposing her tight, untouched hole. Lila's breath hitches, the reality of what's about to happen hitting her like a sledgehammer. She tries to squirm away, the fear and anticipation making her heart race. But his hand is firm on her back, keeping her in place as he lines his cock up. He doesn't ask for permission, doesn't give her a moment to protest. He just pushes the head of his cock, breaching her tight ring of muscle. Lila screams, the pain searing as he forces his way in. Primal doesn't relent, his hips moving in a steady, unforgiving rhythm. She feels her body stretch and give way, his thickness filling her, stealing her breath. Her eyes squeeze shut, tears leaking out as she tries to process the sensations. The pleasure from her orgasm is distant, dwarfed by the burning pain as he stretches her further than she thought possible. Her body shakes with each thrust, her cries echoing through the cave like the desperate wails of a captured prey. The fur beneath her face is matted with blood from her lip and the marks he's left on her cheeks. She can feel his nails digging into her skin, his grip punctuating each powerful drive forward. The sound of his flesh slapping against hers is a harsh counterpoint to the gentle crackling of the fire. Her eyes squeeze shut, and she bites down on the fur, muffling her screams as he takes her in a way she never thought possible. The pain is a living, pulsing entity that consumes her, leaving no room for anything else. Yet, she can't bring herself to hate it. It's a perverse kind of connection, one that she never knew she needed. Primal snails dig into her hips, leaving deep grooves in her flesh as he ruts into her from behind. She can feel his claws scraping against bone, the pain a constant reminder of who's in control. His cock is a monster inside her, stretching and filling her in a way that's both terrifying and exhilarating. She's never felt so full, so used. Her face is buried in the fur, muffling the screams that tear from her throat. Each time he pulls out, her body clenches around the emptiness, begging for relief. But there's no respite as he slams back in, his grip on her hair tightening with each thrust. He's relentless, his body a piston of power that drives her into the cold stone. The creature before her is a monstrous figure, his fur-covered body a blend of animal and man, his cock a thick, pulsing testament to his primal nature. As he pulls out of her ravaged asshole, she feels the void left behind, a reminder of the brutality she's endured. He grins, a twisted smile that shows off his sharp teeth, and his eyes gleam with excitement as he observes her pain. He wipes his cock on her back, smearing her with his cum and her own blood. The fur beneath her is stained with their mixed fluids, a cushion that has long since lost any semblance of comfort. With a cruel chuckle, he reaches for her wrists, his hands like steel manacles as he adjusts her position. She's forced onto all fours, her knees digging into the hard ground, sending jolts of pain through her bruised body. He then inserts his hand into her gaping hole, his fingers probing and stretching the sensitive tissue. She whimpers, the sensation overwhelming, her body trembling with fear and anticipation. The fur beneath her sticks to her sweat-drenched skin, adding to the sense of helplessness that has become her constant companion in this hellish cave. He works his hand in and out of her, his knuckles brushing against her inner walls, eliciting a fresh wave of pain mixed with an unwelcome arousal. Her eyes water as he widens her opening further, a silent scream caught in her throat. The fire flickers, casting his shadow onto the cave wall, making him seem even more monstrous as he looms over her. His grunts of effort meld with her cries of pain, creating a symphony of depravity that echoes through the cavern. With a roar that shakes the cavern, he slams back into her, his cock sinking deep into the abyss he's created. She screams again, the pain so intense it feels like her body might split in two. But she's grown accustomed to this dance of agony, and her muscles clench around him, drawing him deeper despite her protests. His bush brushes against her, sending a new wave of sensation through her heightened nerves. Primal pauses, his hand splayed over her ass, fingers digging into her flesh. He spreads her cheeks wide, admiring the gaping hole he's claimed as his own. A bead of spit forms on his lips, and with a malicious glint in his eye, he lets it fall, watching as it splashes onto her exposed asshole. The saliva trickles down, a slick path that only serves to make the next thrust even more unbearable. He laughs, a low, guttural sound that echoes off the stone walls, the sound of his pleasure melding with her pain. Panic sets in as she feels his climax approaching, his grunts growing more feral. She tries to crawl away, her limbs trembling with the effort. But he's too strong, too fast. His hand wraps around her hip, squeezing gently, reminding her of his dominance. "Mine," he growls, his voice deep and guttural. The fire in the pit casts shadows on the walls, dancing like a twisted ballet as their bodies move in a macabre rhythm. She can feel the heat of his breath against her neck, his teeth scraping the sensitive skin. Lila knows she must act now or be lost to him forever. With a sudden burst of strength, she rears her head back and slams it into his face, making him momentarily loosen his grip. In that split second, she pulls away, her body moving on instinct alone. She turns and, with a desperate kick, she connects with his most vulnerable spot. Primal howls in pain, his eyes going wide with shock and anger as he doubles over. Her heart racing, Lila scrambles to her feet and sprints for the cave's entrance. She can feel his heavy footsteps thundering behind her, the ground shaking with each step. She knows she won't be able to outrun him for long. His legs are longer, his body built for pursuit. But she has to try. The cool night air hits her as she bursts into the forest, her bare skin pebbling with goosebumps. She can feel the sticky wetness between her legs, a testament to the brutal claiming she's just escaped. Her breath comes in ragged gasps, each inhale a struggle as the adrenaline pumps through her veins. The woods are dark, a tapestry of shadows that seem to reach out and grab at her. She can't tell if it's fear or the memory of his teeth on her neck that makes her run faster. Her legs burn with each step, but she doesn't dare slow down. Suddenly, she feels his hand clamp around her ankle, yanking her back with inhuman strength. She hits the ground hard, the wind knocked out of her. Primal looms over her, his eyes blazing with a mix of lust and anger. Mine, he snarls, his cock still hard and slick with her blood. Please let me go, Lila sobs, her voice trembling with fear and pain. I can't do this anymore. But she knows the beast inside him won't listen to reason. In desperation, she reaches for his knife he keeps hidden at his side, the cold steel a comforting weight in her hand. With a swift motion she grabs it. She turns and slices through the air, feeling the blade bite into his thigh. Primal howls in agony, his grip loosening just enough for her to pull away. She scurries back on her hands, her eyes never leaving his furious gaze. The knife feels slick in her hand, her own blood mixing with his, the knife not safely at his side but in her hand. He advances on her, his eyes wild and feral, the blood from his wound soaking the fur. Mine, he snarls, his cock still standing tall and angry. Lila's heart races as she realizes the gravity of her actions. She's hurt him, and now she must face the consequences. Please, she whispers, her voice shaking with fear. Let me go. But the creature that is primal is beyond reason now. His grip tightens around her throat, lifting her off the ground. She can feel his cock pressing against her stomach, demanding entry, demanding ownership. With a knife clutched tightly in her hand, Lila tries to push away from him, to fight the inevitable. But his strength is too much. He slams her back into the tree, the impact knocking the wind out of her. Stars dance before her eyes, and she drops the knife, her hand going limp. Primal's grip tightens, his teeth bared in a snarl. He's going to take her, she knows it. The beast has claimed her, and she's his to use. But as she feels his cock press against her, she also feels something else, his hand, moving down to cup her mound, his claws digging in just enough to make her whimper. The pain is a jolt of reality, snapping her out of her fear-induced haze.
She's not just a piece of meat to him.
She's more than that. She's his mate? The thought sends a shock through her, and she reaches up to touch his face, her hand trembling. Please, she whispers, her voice hoarse. Be gentle, you're hurting me. The beast in him seems to hear her plea. His eyes soften, the wildness retreating, and he gently lowers her to the ground. He's still inside her, his cock. Still thick and hard, but the aggression is gone. He kisses her neck, his tongue flicking out to taste her blood, and she shivers with a mix of fear and arousal. Mine, he murmurs, his voice a rumble in his chest. He pulls his fingers from her ass, the sudden emptiness, making her whimper. She feels so used, so utterly claimed, and yet she can't help but want more. She watches as he positions himself between her legs, his cock slick with her blood and his own pre-cum. Without a word, he slams into her pussy, the force making her scream. The pain is intense, but it's a different kind of pain than before. It's a pain that tells her she's alive, that she's his in some way. She wraps her legs around his waist, urging him deeper, her nails digging into his back. The fire in her veins is a living flame, consuming her fear and doubt. If he comes, she tells herself, if she can just make him come, maybe he'll be satisfied. Maybe he'll let her go. Maybe this nightmare will end. She focuses on the feeling of his cock inside her, the way it stretches her, fills her. It's a strange kind of comfort in the midst of the horror. Lila's eyes squeeze shut, and she clenches her teeth, willing her body to respond. She can feel his desperation, his need to claim her fully, to mark her as his own. And she knows that the only way to survive this is to give him what he wants. Her hips begin to move with his, her legs wrapping around his waist to draw him deeper. She arches her back, taking him in with a willingness that surprises even herself. The pain subsides, replaced by a burning, all-consuming desire that threatens to engulf her. Her pussy clenches around him, and she moans, the sound a mix of agony and need. Primal's eyes never leave hers, watching the play of emotions across her face. He sees the fear, the doubt, but he also sees the lust. It's a heady cocktail that fuels his own desire, making him thrust harder, deeper. He can feel her body responding to him, her muscles tightening around his cock, her breath hitching with each thrust. But Lila wants more than just this brutal fuck. She wants to taste him, to feel the power of his climax on her tongue. So, she does the only thing she can think of, she slaps him. The sound echoes through the clearing, and he rears back, his eyes widening in shock. For a moment, she thinks she's gone too far. His hand moves to his cheek, his expression a mix of pain and disbelief. But then, something shifts in his gaze, and she knows she's won this small battle of wills. Lay down, she commands, her voice firm despite the tremor in her body. Let me put that beast of a cock in my mouth. With a snarl, Primal complies, his muscles rippling as he lowers himself to the soft grass. But instead of allowing her to take control, he grabs her by the neck and yanks her down, flipping their positions. You want this? He says, his cock still slick with her blood and juices. Taste me so deep it takes your breath away, Lila nods, her eyes never leaving his. She's not sure if it's fear or need that fuels her desire now, but she knows she can't resist him. Primal's grip tightens, his thumb pressing into the soft flesh of her throat. He releases her neck, only to replace it with the head of his cock. She opens her mouth, eager to taste him, to feel his power against her tongue. He doesn't go gentle, pushing in deep with a groan that vibrates through her body. She gags, the taste of blood and pre-cum coating her mouth. But she doesn't pull away. Instead, she wraps her lips around him, her tongue swirling around the head, teasing his slit. His hips buck, and he starts to fuck her face with the same brutal rhythm he'd used on her ass. Lila's eyes water, her throat burning with each thrust. She can feel him swell even more, his grip on her head tightening as he fucks her mouth like it's her destiny. He's in complete control, and she loves it. It's a twisted, perverse love that she never knew existed, but here, in the dark woods with the creature who's claimed her, it makes perfect sense. The world outside their bubble of pain and pleasure crashes in. The distant roar of engines pierces the night air, the sound of bikers growing louder by the second. Primal's eyes snap to the cave entrance, his body tense. He pulls out of her mouth with a wet pop, his cock glistening with her saliva and blood. Bend over, he growls, his voice a command. Lila doesn't hesitate, the fear of being caught by the bikers overriding any sense of dignity. She turns, placing her hands on the tree trunk, and presents her ass to him. Primal's eyes narrow, his grip on her hips firm as he lines up his cock with her slick pussy. You're such a dirty girl, he snarls, his voice a mix of anger and lust. Mine, with a fierce growl, he thrusts into her, the force of his entry making her cry out. The sound of the bikers draws closer, the vibrations from their engines sending tremors through the earth beneath them. Lila's mind races as Primal's cock fills her, the pain mixing with the urgency of their situation. "They're coming," she whispers urgently, her eyes wide with fear. "I need to finish what he started. Take what's yours." The words are barely out of her mouth before she feels him begin to move again, his strokes quick and shallow, as if he's trying to hold back the tide of his climax. Primal's breath is hot on her neck as he pumps into her, his teeth grazing her skin. She can feel his desperation, his need to claim her fully before they're discovered. "Your kitten," she gasps, pushing back against him. The words seem to break through the haze of his lust, his movements faltering for a brief moment. Then, with a roar that shakes the leaves above them, he slams into her one last time, his cock pulsing with the force of his orgasm. Lila feels the warm flood of his cum fill her, mixing with the blood and sweat already slicking her thighs. He pulls out, remembering the fullness she's just experienced. She collapses to the ground, her body trembling with the aftershocks of their union. Primal stands over her, his cock still demanding, her eyes in horror. "Mine," he says again, his voice a low growl. "Mine to breed." With that, he turns and sprints into the woods, his powerful legs carrying him away from the shadows of the woods and towards the distant sounds of the approaching bikers. Lila watches him go, her heart racing. She's alone again, but she's not afraid. She's alive, despite her swollen asshole. The night air is cold against her bare skin, but she doesn't move. She's too exhausted, too overwhelmed. She listens as the bikes grow louder, her heart pounding in her chest. She's certain they'll find her, that her freedom is nothing but a fleeting illusion. The engines fade away, swallowed by the forest. Hours pass in the stillness, now back at the cave, the echoes of their passion and the fading sound of the bikers the only reminders of the chaos that had invaded her sanctuary. Lila lies on the fur, her body a canvas of pain and pleasure. The fire has burned down to embers, casting the cavern in a soft, warm glow. She can still feel the ghost of his teeth, the sting of his slap, the heat of his cum inside her. As the night wears on, the reality of what she's become dawns on her. She's no longer just a slut on the run. She's the mate of a creature who has claimed her in every conceivable way. Yet, somewhere in the recesses of her mind, the thought of her old life flutters like a trapped butterfly. She needs to help him, to show him that there's more to life than hiding in the shadows, more to the world than fear and solitude. Days turn into a blur of pain and pleasure as Primal continues his ritual. Each morning, he would wake her with a brutal fuck, his teeth sinking into her skin as he claimed her once again. He'd leave her bruised and trembling, her body slick with their combined juices. Afterward, he'd disappear into the woods, leaving her to recover and await his return. The hours alone in the cave became a strange sort of solace for Lila. She'd clean herself with water from the nearby pools, her body grew accustomed to the pain, craving the fiery pleasure that followed. It was a cycle she never imagined herself succumbing to, yet she found herself eagerly anticipating the moment he'd come back to her. Lila pondered her situation, the line between victim and participant blurring with each passing day. Was she hiding from the bikers, or was she hiding from the truth of her own desires? Her thoughts often drifted to the world beyond the woods, the life she'd left behind. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't miss it. The fear of the unknown had been replaced with a fear of losing what she'd found here. Starting a new chapter in this twisted tale of survival and desire, she knew she had to confront the creature who had claimed her. Primal was more than just a beast. He was a part of her now, a piece of her soul that had been unlocked in the throes of passion and pain. It was time to break the cycle of fear and show him that she wasn't just a helpless human, but a partner in this unconventional dance of life. One evening, as Primal slept beside her, Lila made her move. Carefully, she slid from under his heavy arm, her body aching from the latest round of his fervent claiming. She searched the cave for the knife they'd used in their earlier struggle, her hand closing around the cold steel with a sense of grim determination. This wasn't about ending his life, but about freeing herself from his dominance. Her heart raced as she approached him. She knew that to escape, She had to cut through the bonds of fear and need that held her captive. But could she do it without unleashing the very beast
She feared?
Her hand hovered over his chest, the blade poised and ready to strike. Lila took a deep breath, her hand shaking with the weight of her decision. In that moment, she understood that true freedom didn't come from running, but from facing the monster inside. She didn't want to harm him, but she had to find a way out of this cycle of fear and pain. Slowly, she lowered the knife and placed it beside his head, her eyes searching his peaceful face. Her heart hammered against her chest as she straddled him, her body still sore from his earlier attentions. She whispered his name, a gentle caress against the beast that slumbered within him. His eyes flickered open, and she saw the man beneath the fur, the humanity that she'd come to care for. "I need you to listen," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "We can't keep doing this." He snarled, the animal instincts rising to the surface. "You're mine," he rumbled, his hand reaching up to grasp the knife. But she was quicker, pressing the blade to the soft skin of his throat. "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "But I'm not just a toy for you to play with." His eyes searched hers, the confusion and anger warring within him. "You're more than that, Primal. We both are." The fire crackled in the background. "You want me to be a part of this world," she said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. "To help you understand humans, to accept you. But you have to understand me too. You can't keep treating me like this." Primal's eyes narrowed, the blade of the knife pressing lightly against his neck. The beast in him was restless, but he didn't move, recognizing the shift in their dynamic. "You're not just a warm body to fuck," Lila continued, her words a gentle yet firm command. "We need to find a balance, or this will destroy us both." His eyes searched hers, the humanity beneath the fur beginning to assert itself. His hand hovered over the knife, but instead of taking it, he wrapped his fingers around her wrist, gently guiding her hand away from his throat. His touch was surprisingly tender, a stark contrast to the brutal claimings of the past days. Lila felt a tremor run through him as she straddled him, and she realized he was getting hard again. Her body responded in kind, the ache between her legs swelling into something more insistent. The knife remained in her grip, a silent testament to the power struggle between them. He laughed, a low, rumbling sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You think you can threaten me?" he said, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "You're just a baby girl," he said with a soft but commanding voice. His grip on her wrist tightened, and she could feel his strength, the power that had claimed her so completely. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in closer, the knife still at his throat. "I'm not threatening you," she said, her voice steady. "I'm just showing you that I won't be a victim anymore. We can do this together, or we can do it apart. It's your choice." For a moment, Primal's grip on her wrist didn't loosen, his eyes still holding hers. Then, with a sigh that was almost human, he released her hand. His other hand moved to her hip, and he lifted her torso with surprising ease, his gaze never leaving hers. He positioned her above his erection, the tip nudging against her kitten. With a swift, decisive move, Lila brought herself down onto him, impaling herself on his thick length. He groaned, the sound resonating through the cavern, and she felt a thrill of power as his eyes rolled back with pleasure. She braced herself, her hands on his chest, and began to rock her hips, setting a slow, steady rhythm. The weight of his body pressed him into the soft fur, his heat enveloping her. As she moved, the knife glinted in the firelight, still held loosely in her hand. Primal's eyes followed the arc of the blade as it traced a path from her throat down to her chest, the metal cool against her feverish skin. She could see the conflict in his gaze, desire warring with the instinct to claim, to dominate. But she wasn't letting him take control this time. With a quick thrust of his hips, he tried to overpower her, but she was ready. Lila brought the knife to her own throat, pressing the sharp edge against her jugular, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not just a hole for you to fill," she said, her voice a dangerous whisper. "If you want me, you'll do it on my terms." Primal's laugh was a thing of the wild, a sound that didn't belong to any creature she knew. He grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her off him, sending her sprawling onto the fur. She felt the sting of tears in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment she had to stand up to him. He stood, towering over her, his cock still erect and slick with their combined juices. The firelight played off the muscles of his body, casting him in a primal glow that made him seem more beast than man. But she didn't cower. She knew the power she held. He was still hers to command, and she wasn't going to let him forget it. With a roar that echoed through the cave, Primal lunged for her. But she was ready. She rolled out of his grasp, the knife flashing in the fire as she brought it up to block his advance. His eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something else, respect, perhaps, or maybe even a hint of admiration. He stepped back, his chest heaving, the muscles rippling beneath his fur. "You think you can fight me?" he taunted, his voice a deep primal challenge. Lila felt the power of his presence, the dominance that had been the hallmark of their every encounter. But she didn't flinch. With a sudden burst of strength, Primal grabbed her by the hair, yanking her to her feet. She yelped in pain, but she didn't struggle, her eyes locked on his. He dragged her to the cave's entrance, the knife forgotten in the tapestry of furs. She stumbled along behind him, her naked body bruised and raw from their earlier battles. The cool night air hit her like a slap, the contrast to the warmth of the cave making her shiver. The moon cast a silver glow over the forest floor, lighting their path as he hauled her deeper into the woods. Lila's heart raced, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Was this it? Was he going to leave her to the mercy of the bikers? Or was this some new twisted game in their dance of dominance and submission? "Keep walking," he growled, the stick in his hand cutting through the air with a whistle before. It connected with the soft flesh of her back. The pain was a reminder of their unconventional bond. She stumbled forward, her bare feet sinking into the soft earth, the sticks and rocks digging into her feet. "Hands on your head," Primal barked again, and Lila obeyed, her feet pressing into the cold dirt as she continued to march through the forest. The sting of each whip-like strike grew more intense, but she didn't dare break the rhythm of their twisted ritual. She knew the price of disobedience. They moved through the underbrush for what felt like a mile, the only sounds their harsh breathing and the slap of his stick against her bare skin. The pain grew into a steady throb, a pulse that matched the racing of her heart. Despite the fear, she felt a strange sense of exhilaration, her body alive with the thrill of the unknown. Suddenly, she couldn't take it anymore. The need for escape overwhelmed her, and she takes off sprinting through the trees. The stick clattered to the ground, forgotten as she tore through the underbrush, her bare breasts bouncing with each frantic step. She didn't dare look back, didn't dare let him see the fear in her eyes. Her lungs burned with the effort, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. She could hear his heavy footfalls closing the distance, the snapping of branches underfoot growing louder with each passing second. Panic clawed at her chest, her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. Then, just as she thought she'd reached the edge of the forest, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, muffling her scream. A cold, hard metal pressed against the small of her back, and a gruff voice hissed, "Quiet, bitch, unless you want to see what a real monster looks like." Her eyes widened with terror as she recognized the leather-clad arm, and the smell of gasoline was one of the bikers, hiding in the dark, waiting to claim his prize. His grip was iron, his hand squeezing her mouth so tight she could feel her teeth cutting into her cheek. She struggled, her body trembling with fear and exertion, but his strength was unyielding. The cold metal of a zip tie bit into her wrists as he secured her, his breath hot and rank against her skin. She tried to scream, to fight, but his